Hello there, I'm David Clutterbuck, and I'm one of the original pioneers of modern mentoring. Um, I'm one of the two original co-founders of the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, the primary professional body for mentors, both in the UK and across the world. Um, and I lead a global network of mentoring trainers, consultants, and researchers. Um, I'll be 75 next year, and I should just about have done 75 books, the majority of them in this whole area of coaching and mentoring, because it's taken over my life and it's been immense fun and a tremendous learning journey for me, as I'm sure it is for many of you who've been involved with mentoring for some time. Being a mentor is both a privilege and responsibility, I think. Um, it requires us to not to just be passive about our role as a mentor, but to be proactive, to be constantly learning and developing, challenging what we think we knew, and particularly challenge our assumptions. Um, I I find it really helpful to try and take one assumption that I have um, each month and try and look, if I haven't already have been challenged on something, and just say, how true is that? Is it totally true? Is it partially true? Is it never true? Um, and this is one of the ways in which we maintain our freshness as a mentor. And over the time, we've looked at, we've done massive research projects into, for example, the endings of mentoring relationships. Uh, and what actually happens at the ending. And in that particular piece of research, which was quite a long time ago, we found that it really mattered how you ended. So that if you just let the relationship drift away, both of you would feel slightly negative about it. In fact, sometimes very negative about it. But if you celebrated what you'd achieved, even if you hadn't achieved everything that you wanted to, then that was much more powerful. And so you were able to basically have um, a positive, grateful relationship between the two of you. Both of you will feel positive and grateful towards each other. So all of this research and all of these changes that we've seen have come from a very small beginning, really. Way back in the very late 1970s and early 1980s, the idea of mentoring, a planned mentoring anyway, was something that began to appear in literature in the Americas. And then people started to bring it into Europe, where we already had mentoring, but it was very much informal mentoring. And as a result of that organizations in Europe very quickly started to create structured mentoring or planned mentoring programs. The part of the problem, however, was that in America, they not actually read the story properly of or where mentoring comes from. If you're probably aware that that Mentor was the old man that Athena, the goddess of wisdom, impersonated in her conversations with Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, and his son Telemachus on their journeys. And what actually happened there was that she helped them to think about their experiences, learn from those experiences, and become wiser. Now, the story then moves on, and the concept of mentoring is there in the background in European literature and thinking, until it comes to the court of King Louis the Sun King, and in France. And King Louis basically, well, he had a son, the Dauphin, who was a brat, and they got a cleric called Fenelon, who did what Athena did. And Fenelon the cleric had these conversations. Whenever this boy misbehaved, he helped him think about it and reasoned with him, and massively changed him. And he wrote a book continuing the dialogues of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, with Telemachus, the son of Odysseus. And that went wildfire. And it was the first management and leadership book, if you discount Machiavelli, in Europe. And unfortunately, in the Americas, they mixed up Athena, the goddess of wisdom, with Athena, the goddess of martial arts. And so what you see very often in American literature is a confusion between the mentor in the true role and a sponsor. Now we know from research that those two roles are incompatible. It's possible to have both mentor and a sponsor, two different people, but having the two roles together is very, very difficult to manage, simply because with a sponsor, you want them to think well of you. You only want to tell them things that are really going to make them want to champion you. And so the nature of the relationship is very different between sponsor and mentor. But across the world, we've been seeing masses of different applications. And the original applications, both in America and in Europe, were for graduate recruits. Unfortunately, the definition of mentoring at that stage from America was overseeing the career of a young man. And that's a bit unfortunate, because that's one of the places that mentoring has been most powerful, is supporting gender equality in the workplace. And you know, those early days, thankfully, we're long past, and we have many, much more diverse and inclusive ways of using mentoring to change society for the good. We can think about a whole bunch of them. Executive mentoring is growing, has been growing for many years. And then this is where somebody gets to a very senior level in an organization. It's very lonely there. Now you can have a coach, but a coach will tend to work on performance issues and so forth. A mentor has something different. A mentor brings relevant experience from which they can craft better questions, and they will have greater credibility. There's a myth that goes around, spread in many cases by coaches trying to differentiate their own practice and say, well, because I charge more, I must be doing something better. And that myth is that mentors are directive and coaches not. Complete nonsense. All the origins of coaching up until the same sort of period, the late 1970s, were coaching, which was only the word only appears in the mid 1800s, was a very directive form of tuition and instruction. But what we see as neither coaching nor mentoring in their modern forms would give people advice or tell people what to do. There's an enormous difference between giving context and giving advice. If you give context to somebody, you're able to help them with the quality of their thinking. If you give somebody advice, you're doing the thinking for them. And so in whether you are a coach or a mentor, really to a large extent depends on the relevant experience that you can bring. A coach doesn't necessarily have that experience that enables to ask those really deep questions that come from having been there and having had the experience that's relevant. And so their contextual ability is less than that of a mentor. Apart from that, however, most of the skills and competencies of a coach or a mentor are pretty much the same. And the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, which was started in 1991 as the European Mentoring Centre, because coaching really didn't exist very much at that point, has the objective of very much linking of finding the commonalities and the core skills and ways of thinking and frameworks underneath that link things together. So it's about encouraging diversity by finding the things that bring different disciplines together. We see lots of mentoring programs for entrepreneurs. I'm involved in one at the moment for the Royal Academy of Engineering, which is for entrepreneurs across the world in developing countries who want to take their inventions into the market. And they're being mentored by more experienced entrepreneurs. There's a mass of programs for people for immigrants into countries. One of my favorites was in Canada, where the whole program was about supporting women who had professional qualifications that weren't valid in the country. And most of them also had AIDS. And helping these women to become acclimatized, to feel welcome in their new home, to be able to get through the bureaucracy to requalify. This is a wonderful way of supporting people when they need it most. Other programs we see, ex-offenders, there are many programs around the world for helping people who've been to jail or have been convicted of crimes to actually reconnect with society. So the reconnection is such an important part of mentoring. And then we've got mentoring programs taking people into retirement. We've got almost any kind of transition. You may have heard of the leadership pipeline. That's something where at different levels of people's careers in an organization, their main mind frame has to change. So you move from managing yourself to managing other people, to managing managers, to managing functions, and to managing organizations. Each stage requires a massive change in the complexity of your thinking. And what mentors do is to help you make that transition. I recall when one of my mentors talking to me, not just about what things that concern me, but talking to me about his job and the problems that he had to face and the way that he had to think about them. And then I got promoted and I went to say thank you. And he said, nothing to do with me. I couldn't do anything because I'm your mentor, but so I couldn't influence it. But you got promoted because you were thinking like a manager, a person at the next level of management. Fantastic. And that's lived with me ever since. We've got a number of programs now in various countries, and certainly lots in the UK and Scotland and England and Northern Wales and Northern Ireland, about return to work, both men and women. And what these do, the proportion of women who will come back to their old jobs and the speed with which they will feel comfortable get settling back into the work routines, having had quite a bit of time off to look after a new baby. Those are real benefits for the organization. And the mentors are always other mums in the organization who've been through the process and can bring them up to date to everything that's changing the way the organization thinks. Organizations are constantly shifting and evolving, and to help them to settle back in quickly. We have in the National Health Service, we've trained over 200 ethical mentors. We've doing this in other sectors too, but an ethical mentor is somebody who may be an internal coach, maybe a senior manager, but there's somebody who is able to sit down with somebody who has or thinks they have an ethical dilemma. And that person that is able to explore it, look at you. Is it an ethical dilemma? What can you do with this situation that isn't damaging to yourself and to other people? And this is a wonderful way for dealing with whistleblowing, for example, but also for creating psychological safety, such a big need across so many organizations. We've seen a great swell of increase recently in reverse and reciprocal mentoring. Now, reverse mentoring is simply where you have a junior person mentoring a very senior person. And it's been used a lot in gender-based issues or programs and in race and culture-based programs. Reciprocal mentoring is where you emphasize the co-learning that takes place here. So it's more powerful in that sense. And reciprocal mentoring is something that's there to try and change not just the two individuals, but the whole system, the organization itself. And what we're seeing is that this is one of the few things that's making a big difference in terms of diversity and inclusion. Far more difference than, say, diversity training or implicit bias training, which has a very poor track record of actually changing anything. And if we look at all of these things, we can see that people can be mentor or mentee at any stage in their lives. And that's brilliant. But basically, we can take advantage of this, or we can give back at all periods of our life. And I'm currently been experimenting on a program which we plan to launch very soon, where we've been going to schools and giving the schools materials so that the school children can learn to be coaches and mentors to each other. And most schools mentoring is about teachers working or people coming in from outside, but this is about the children themselves learning these skills of coaching and mentoring so that they can take them into their careers, make better career decisions themselves, and take them into the workplace. And when as they go further in their careers, it's an awe-inspiring program. And our objective is to get 5 million school-age coaches and mentors across the world over a 5-year period, and it's going to be an exciting journey. In the materials, we also there's a whole chapter at the end of the book for the children, how to mentor your parents, and we find that's one of the most popular chapters that we have. One of the things that I think it's worth really stressing, the way that we look at mentoring and the way that it's going, is mentoring has its roots in wisdom, in and we said already that Athena was the goddess of wisdom. Um, and we've been doing a lot of research into in the parallel area of coaching into coach maturity. So how do coaches evolve in their thinking? And there's a lot of parallel here between professional mentors, for example, seem to go through exactly the same phases. And you start off in this phase where you've got some processes and models, and you you try and use those models, and you're doing coaching or mentoring to somebody. You become more relaxed into the process. You have a bigger toolkit, and you start doing coaching with people. Then you integrate who you are with what you do as a coach or mentor. And this is being. So we've moved from doing to being a mentor. And then finally, we have what we call the systemic eclectic. The systemic eclectic sees the wider system. They see the individual in the context of the systems in which they're nested. And they have a big range of a big toolkit. But what they do is they don't do anything so much as they hold the client or hold the mentee while they have the conversation they need to have with themselves. And this is incredibly powerful because they do a lot less, but they achieve a lot more. And we see this in our current research program, looking at the stages of coach maturity and the transitions that people make. That increasingly, as people become these systemic eclectic coaches, they become more and more like mentors. They're able to use themselves and their experience in a way that's not directive, that actually elicits all sorts of thoughts and understandings in the other person. They're able to do this with deftness and skill. And so it's not surprising that now that one of the definitions of mentoring is coaching plus, and the plus being bringing the ability to bring all that experience into helping somebody else to learn. Other things that I think are really important here is the qualities that we're looking for. In our studies of leadership, coaching, and mentoring, we found that there are 4 qualities that underpin everybody. One of them is compassion, having compassion for others and for yourself as well, being able to forgive yourself. The second one is courage, being able to say the right thing and ask that really strong question when it's needed. The curiosity, being genuinely interested in other people and the way that they see the world. And connection. In South Africa or in Africa, they have this term Ubuntu, I am because we are. Really feeling that genuine connection or desire to connect with the worlds of the people that we're mentoring. And if we look at some of the current issues that are happening at the moment, so the big things that we can explore, I think we're seeing increasing emphasis on continuous professional development for mentors, growing them beyond just about the basic skills, seeing it as a journey, a long-term journey for them. Not everybody wants to become a professional mentor, and very few people do, by comparison with coaching, certainly. But there are steps we can take, and this year I'm launching. We've been experimenting in Russia with a mentoring academy that follows through the stages of professional qualification that are normally applied to coaches and applies them to mentors. So it's quite a long period of study, but to come out with the skills of the highest level of coach, but there's extra additional skill and competence as a mentor. It's also observing, and we also observe that there's a growing need and proactivity towards supervision. So just as the main professional bodies in Europe suggest recommend that all coaches should have supervision, increasingly we're seeing that supervision is really helpful for mentors. Now, it may not be as frequent, but helping you to think through the learning and from the experiences that you have as a mentor, that's a really strong role of supervision. So we expect to see that grow quite a lot as well. One of the things that I also find really, really important is the growth of standards and accreditation. So the levels that we'll be looking at in the Mentoring Academy reflects those across the board that the European Mentoring and Coaching Council has created. And basically, you can qualify as a mentoring program manager, for example. You can qualify at the various levels as a mentor. So there's lots of different ways in which you can actually enhance your understanding and your engagement with the mentoring process. And I'd like to just end on a really controversial note. We've been looking very closely at mentoring in the context of social change. We're beginning to see how some mentors of very senior people are recognizing that they have a responsibility for, if they're mentoring leaders, for example, or at the top organizations, to ensure that those leaders are at least thinking about themselves as good ancestors. What is the legacy that that leader is going to leave for their grandchildren's grandchildren? And so it's I think a massive shift from responding to people to actually helping people to engage with the wider world and the wider social issues. Now, to what extent, where does this start and where does it end? That's a big debate, and one of the ones I think that we're going to have a lot more within in the world of mentoring. But if we link that to one of the issues that's coming out in the reciprocal mentoring, typically a mentor will say, I'm here to help you navigate the systems of this organization. Now, you may not be from, you may have a different color or be racially different or culturally different or gender different, but I'm going to help you negotiate the organization as it is. This is increasingly being called into question for saying, is that actually, surely that's racist? Now, question mark, because that's perpetuating the system rather than changing the system. And what we're seeing in the reciprocal mentoring programs that we are now observing and being part of across the UK in particular, and elsewhere in Australia and other places, is we're now starting to say, actually, the responsibility of the mentor and the mentee together is to work collaboratively to try and change the system. Now we're stepping into an enormous big area that's pretty much untrod in the area of mentoring. Mentoring not just achieving change through focus on individuals, but mentoring achieving change through focusing on society and the systems within it. I think that's an area where we don't know quite where we're going. We just know that we have to actually engage with that particular concept. As always, it's another or yet another exciting, challenging step forward in this journey of mentoring that goes back thousands of years and are now becoming one of the critical instruments for change in our society. It's a privilege to be a mentor, but it's also a responsibility. Thank you for listening to me.